Hello comrades, you are watching Red Ivan Military, and today we are going to compare uniforms and equipment of the United States Armed Forces and the Armed Forces of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel and subscribe to my Instagram. Now we'll compare this equipment by elements: helmets, body armor, load-bearing systems, as well as uniforms and footwear of both countries. In my case, the uniforms of both countries are represented by samples specifically for the Marine Corps and Naval Infantry. But in general, the field uniforms of the ground forces were more or less the same. There are some distinct features in the uniforms of the Soviet airborne forces, as well as difference in headgear between the US Army and the US Marine Corps, and some specifics in their equipment. But we'll discuss it separately. It is not the main point. More or less, the equipment was pretty much the same across all infantry units and formations. And we'll start with the headgear. As a service headgear, the Soviet Naval Infantry used black berets, but for field use they relied on this camouflaged cap with ear flaps. In the US, the Marine Corps wore so-called 8-point cover, while the Army wore the BDU cap, also with ear flaps, but on the inner side. In the summer version of this cap, the ear flaps were completely absent. Looking at these headgear options, I can't say that one is fundamentally better than the other. Comparing Soviet field cap to the US Army one, both had ear flaps, meaning that they add some density to the fabric and may be uncomfortable to wear in summer. Considering that the summer version of the US Army cap didn't appear right away, and it was introduced more or less after Grenada, when complaints about the very hot demi-season cap came in. So I don't think there is a much point in dwelling on headgear. Let's talk about uniforms. The field uniform in the US Army and the US Marine Corps at that time was the BDU, or battle dress uniform. This uniform was adopted for service in 1981. While the Soviet Union's units were equipped with the uniform of the 1988 model. In fact, this uniform isn't from 1988. It was being developed since the late 70s. The first experimental samples were tested in Afghanistan in 1981, and the final technical specification for the general purpose version appeared in 1982. The rules for wearing this uniform were officially adopted in 1988, because before that it was mainly worn in Afghanistan. So while its official name is Model of 1988, of course it existed since the early 80s. In Afghanistan they used a solid sand-colored version of this uniform. In the mid-80s camouflage versions appeared. There was an exclusive version with a distinct cut specifically for the airborne forces, as well as a camouflage version in a general issue cut, which during the Soviet era was primarily issued to the naval infantry. It could be seen in some other Soviet units, but was mainly issued to the naval infantry. Notably, even the anchor patch was sewn on directly at the factory. Today we'll talk about the general issue cut, because this is what I have, but we already discussed differences in the airborne cut versus naval infantry cut, different camouflage schemes in my other video, which is called Everything You Need to Know About Afghanka. So if you want to know more details about the uniforms, go and watch that video. Just keep in mind that regular infantry units were issued with the general issue cut, but in one tone, right? It's usually sand color Afghanka, while naval infantry had general issue cut but camouflaged, and airborne troops had slightly different cut variation. And if you're talking about the camouflage, for this I am using the camouflage commonly known as Butan or TCKO in the United States, which makes no sense because TCKO stands for three-color camouflage. And as you know, most of the Soviet and post-Soviet camouflages had three-color schemes, so this is nonsense. The official name of this camouflage is turned up to be Zebra 2. Despite the fact that another, more successful Soviet camouflage, which ironically everybody knows as Barvikha, but is officially called Butan, was developed in the Soviet Union and tested in Afghanistan. It was only mass-produced since 1992, so objectively, at the time of the Soviet Union's existence, that camouflage was not yet widespread. So if you want to compare Soviet camouflage to American, we must use this one, which is commonly known as Butan, but in reality officially called Zebra 2. In terms of uniforms, the BDU is very similar to the Soviet Afghanka. Both have 4 front pockets on the jacket. The only difference is that Afghanka also has 2 sleeve pockets, which later became a global standard. But at the time the Afghanka appeared, it was only seen in British and East German uniforms. In general, if we talk about the uniform, they are more or less equivalent. That said, I consider the Afghanka jacket more successful because it has sleeve pockets and a plate in the back for freedom of movement, as well as inner pocket for documents. However, the BDU trousers can be considered more successful because they have more interesting cargo pocket design and reinforcement at the seat. In terms of cut, they are more or less equivalent, but when it comes to fabric, American one is better. At least a solid colored Afghanka has extremely dense fabric with a low breathability. Camouflaged one is slightly better, but still is not ideal. From a camouflage perspective, I wore the Ukrainian Dubok for a long time, which is more or less in the same color scheme. In terms of pattern, Soviet Butan is way better than Ukrainian Dubok, and for those of you who don't know, these are 2 different camouflage patterns. But due to the same color scheme, both camouflages blend into a large black spot at long distances. So objectively, in terms of camouflage properties, the American Woodland is much better. There is an opinion that Butan was created for war in the muddy conditions of Europe with the use of the tactical nuclear charges, and in that black mass it would provide an excellent camouflage. But I don't have any data to support this. Although, looking at the modern theater of the ground warfare, it may be somewhat true. Now let's talk about the helmets. When it comes to helmets, in the left corner of the ring we have the 1968 model steel helmet SSH-68, and in the right corner we have a Kevlar PASGT helmet. In my opinion, SSH-68 has only 2 advantages. The first advantage is its weight. In size 1 it weighs 1 kg 223 grams, which is 400 grams less than PASGT helmet in size medium. And the second advantage is its adjustment system. All my life I thought that this helmet is non-adjustable, and the only way to properly or comfortably wear it is to wear it with some liner or maybe some winter hat. But in reality it is not true. It has pretty comfortable adjustment system. We were just not taught properly on how to adjust it. Actually, on the inner side it has leaf springs that tighten when you tie the laces into a bow and pull them. This way the helmet adjusts perfectly to the head circumference, and the inner lace adjusts the depth of fit. In principle, it sits very comfortably. Doesn't tilt, doesn't wobble, and doesn't shift around the head even without using the chin strap. That's why I secured mine around the back of the helmet. The Kevlar PASGT helmet was a standard setter of its time. The helmet's development started in the mid-70s. In 1983, during the Grenada invasion, it was tested in the combat conditions by units of the 82nd Airborne Division, and was officially adopted for service along with the West in 1985. The equipping of the troops continued more or less until the early 90s. In the 1980s the M1 helmet was still seen in some quantities in both the Army and especially the Marine Corps, which initially resisted switching to this helmet because it resembled a Nazi one. What's interesting is that if I recall correctly, Its protection level is 3A, meaning it can stop some pistol bullets. However, it was not designed to stop pistol bullets. This is a purely anti-fragmentation helmet, and it handles its anti-fragmentation role excellently, way better than SSR-68. But again, it also can withstand certain pistol rounds. There is even one helmet now in the museum of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, which withstood a 7.62 Kalashnikov bullet during the Grenada invasion, if I remember correctly, from the distance of 100 meters. Again, it was not designed for that, it might have been just luck, but the fact is documented. The weight of the helmet in size medium is 1 kg 623 grams, which is 400 grams more than SSR-68, but the level of protection is incomparable and unmatched. So in this category the United States is a clear winner. The only question is if you are capable to carry it on your neck all day. Now let's move to the load-bearing systems. Both countries at that time used belt shoulder systems, LBE. Let's start with the Soviet one. In my case, this is a special system for naval infantry units, so it is black, and all the pouches on it are black, except for the entrenching tool pouch. In other Soviet units it was exactly the same, except the pouches came in different colors, from beige to white, and accordingly the shoulder system and belt were brown. Other than that, it's the same thing. The system consists of a canvas belt coated with PVC enamel and a standard metal buckle, depending on the year of manufacture. In the naval infantry, the buckle was either galvanized or painted. Canvas shoulder straps, also coated with PVC enamel, with shoulder pads, were attached to the belt, and then various pouches were attached to the belt itself. In the standard load, it included one 4-section magazine pouch, an entrenching tool, an 800 ml infantry canteen, a grenade pouch for 2 grenades, and a bayonet knife in the front. You could also attach a half shelter to the strap at the back, but when I did it for this video preparation, the rivet holding the stopper broke, and now if I would attach the half shelter, it would slide around, so I just didn't do that. And that's another thing why I hate this thing. It is a pretty cheap, unreliable and uncomfortable piece of equipment. I wore it back in the days. It is bouncing, the belt is getting twisted, all the pouches run back and forth 360 degrees. Of course, I later learned how to adjust it properly. It can be adjusted so the pouches don't slide around. To do that, you need to tighten the belt as much as possible so you can't breathe. But it doesn't worth it. At the end of the day, it is still uncomfortable, it is still unreliable, and in my opinion, it is the worst piece of the Soviet equipment ever. Some of these issues were partially addressed by body armor, which we'll talk about later. But the absurdity and inconvenience of this system are even confirmed by the pictures from the conflicts on the post-Soviet space of the 90s, where almost no one used this LBE in the full form, at most keeping the belt and the magazine pouch, maybe the grenade pouch too. I must admit that the magazine pouch itself is actually pretty clever and pretty cool. First of all, it has a smaller pocket on the side for your oiler. Inside this pocket there is another smaller section for your cleaning kit, in case you have a rifle with a skeleton stock like AKS-74. And then the main compartment is divided into 4 sections. 3 of them are for your magazines, and the 4th one is secured with a smaller lock. It has your adapter and your stripper clips. However, a lot of guys just carried 4 magazines. The only thing I don't really like about this pouch is this closure. It is hard to close it when it's new, and when it wears out a little bit, it actually can be opened just by itself. So this is the only downside of this pouch. It was fixed lately in the pouch for AK-12 magazines, but now it is too late because by the modern standards this pouch is obsolete and they actually changed it to something else already. On the other hand, the United States had an Ellis system. It is a fairly convenient system, though it has its own downsides. In my opinion, this LBE has a lot of protruding metal hardware that digs into various parts of your gear and your sights. Still, for its time, it was a pretty advanced system. It consists of 2 magazine pouches, each holding 3 30-round magazines for M16 rifle, and 2 grenades. 2 canteens were attached at the back. By the way, the 2 canteen setup was more of the Vietnam and Grenada thing. In the US, as far as I know, units were issued 1 canteen, because it didn't make sense other way. It's not a tropical climate. You could also attach either a first aid kit or so-called butt pack to the back. If you were an officer or your role involved a pistol, a universal holster for M9 pistol was attached alongside with pouches for pistol magazines. You could also fit an older holster for the Colt 1911 through the eyelets, and various small medical compass pouches, flashlights, and other gear. In general, I don't find it much comfortable system, but compared to the Soviet system, this one is a Cadillac. Ellis system was developed as a successor to the M1967 system, starting in the late 60s. The first elements appeared around 1971, LC1 was adopted in 1974, later it underwent some changes. We talked about this more in details in my video about Grenada. There is no point dwelling on this here. Now let's move to body armor. The Americans began developing their new body armor in the mid-70s. It saw its combat debut in Grenada in 1983. My armor, by the way, is from 1982. It was officially adopted for service in 1985 along with PASGT helmet. And as we mentioned earlier, widespread distribution to the army happened roughly by the end of the 80s. The weight of the body armor depends on the size. PASGT West in size small weighs around 3.7 kilograms. A medium-sized West weighs 4 kilograms, and so on, plus minus 300 grams per size. This body armor provides only anti-fragmentation protection. If I recall correctly, it has a protection rating of 2A. It can withstand certain pistol rounds, but the manual inside the vest explicitly states that it doesn't provide ballistic protection, and it is not designed to stop bullets. It is purely an anti-fragmentation vest. In other words, Americans prioritized mobility. A lightweight 4 kg body armor vest protects only against fragments, but allows for quick movement on the battlefield. The PASGT vest features 13 layers of aramid, but this layer comparison between two countries makes no sense, because despite the fact that Soviet body armor vest features 30 layers of SVMDG, which is analog of aramid, they have different thickness, so this comparison will tell you nothing. And on top, this vest designed to work with some plates, while this one is not, so these levels just cannot be compared this way. Anyway, the anti-fragmentation protection of this vest is much better than that of the Soviet one if we consider only SVMDG and aramid, without hard plates. PASGT vest is quite minimalistic. It has a collar, the vest fastens with velcro, there are 2 side pockets for magazines and other gear, there are 2 straps to attach grenades or Ellis pouches. In general, the vest was designed to be paired with an Ellis system. To do so, you need to open up these buttons and thread the Ellis suspenders underneath. But these buttons wear out very quickly. On my vest, for example, unfasten them a couple more times and one of them will tear off. Using the Ellis system with this vest is quite convenient. The only thing, in Somalia, I noticed that the soldiers didn't fasten the belt buckle, probably for the quick access in case of injury. Now let's talk about Soviet 6B5 body armor vest. The Soviet Union prioritized ballistic protection. Starting in 1983, with the introduction of the 6B3, Soviet body armor featured ballistic protection. The armor elements were titanium plates of various thickness. With the introduction of the 6B5, boron carbide plates were also added. This vest could stop a 7.62 bullet fired from the AKM at 10 meters, a 7.6 bullet fired from a 5.45mm AK-74 at 35 meters, and an M193 5.56 bullet fired from an M16 at 100 meters. At 80 or less it could penetrate, but at 100 it was held reliably. Everything in the world comes at a cost. Such body armor with ballistic protection front and back weighed around 12 kilograms. You can't run around in that for long. Therefore there was a separate version with a weaker back protection similar to the 6B2 level, more or less anti-fragmentation. That body armor weighed 8 kilograms, which is closer to reasonable. With the introduction of the 6B5, a very interesting concept emerged. The body armor itself, or rather its cover, became more or less universal, and based on the single platform, you could assemble 19 different versions of the body armor. If I'm not mistaken, only 9 of them were adopted for service. But in total, depending on the combination of plates, thickness and type, whether boron carbide or titanium of different thickness was used, you could achieve different levels of protection for the front or back using the same cover and mounting panels. The vest consists of mounting panels with armor plates of different materials arranged in the scale-like pattern, along with soft armor made of 30 layers of SVMDG. Thus, the Soviet vest with anti-fragmentation protection weighs around 5 kilograms. The vest with ballistic protection of the front and back weighs around 12 kilograms, and the combination vest, where front panel has ballistic and the back panel has only fragmentation protection, weighs around 7 to 8 kilograms, which makes this vest truly universal. The build quality of the Soviet vest leaves much to be desired compared to the American one, but even on the American one you saw that hardware wears out pretty quickly. You need to understand that both of these are the mass production items, and they intended to be used by the conscripts or maybe professionals, but in the global war. So they should not last long. They should last long enough. And yes, American West will last slightly longer, but the Soviet West is more universal and more versatile. Now let's see what features it has on the outside. 6B5 features a fairly large protective area, almost reaching the groin. It has a two-piece collar. In the front there are 4 magazine pouches. Each can hold either one 30-round AK magazine or one 45-round RPK-74 magazine. On the shoulders there are special stoppers for the rifle to prevent it from slipping during firing, as well as for the rifle sling or backpack straps. In the back there is a large pocket for radio or personal items, as well as 4 grenade pouches. There are also loops for threading the belt, onto which you can attach additional gear that doesn't fit on the vest. The vest, as it's trendy now, fastens with Velcro that tucks into the front panel. If you are wearing the belt with your vest, it provides additional securing for the mounting panels, so they don't shift forward, and adds extra locking. In my opinion, at any given moment, Soviet 6B5 vest is better than PASGT vest, even having less durability, simply because it's a universal solution. You, or rather your logistics team, can provide the necessary and appropriate level of protection based on your unit's tasks and needs. And then, if you don't need that much of the weight and ballistic protection, you can always take out your ballistic plates like it was done during the Chechen War. Summarizing, both PASGT and 6B5 vests can be used with belts or load-bearing systems for extra pouches. However, 6B5 itself is more universal, more versatile vest with possibility to have ballistic or fragmentation protection, and has dedicated pouches sewn onto it. So, in this category, I believe that USSR has a better item. It is time to compare the footwear. However, what I have here is not really comparable. On the Soviet side, I have this combat all-leather boots with jack boots type sole, model 1981. While on the American side, I have these tropical boots, also known as jungle boots, which were primarily used in the tropical climates. While inside the US back then, all leather combat boots were issued. On the other hand, we are giving the edge to the Soviet Union here, because for this review we chose this M1981 laced boots. While, as some of you know, even during the Afghanistan war, most soldiers wore jack boots or sapagi. And even speaking about the laced boots, these are not the worst, because when I was a cadet in the military lyceum, we wore Soviet-style so-called lightweight boots, and I'm not sure why they were even called lightweight, because they're heavier than the jungle boots. But on top of that, to lighten those boots, they decided to make a sole lighter. So it took between 3 and 4 months to entirely destroy the sole. And even if the sole somehow survived this period, it could dry out and crack itself. For the first 3 months we had a quarantine, like in the boot camp, so you could not leave the base. But as soon as I could leave the base, I went straight to the military shop and bought myself a pair of jungle boots, which I wore since then. All my buddies who had continued to wear Soviet lightweight boots had their feet rubbed raw. And honestly, I don't understand how come the Soviet Union, up until the end of its existence, could not achieve something that the United States accomplished in the early 60s. There was one rare model of the decent Soviet boots, so-called Margelovki, but even these were a Soviet copy of the American Karkaran. I don't want to dwell too much on the smaller gear and weaponry. I will just note that United States used M16A1 rifles, starting in 1983 also A2 rifles. However, the full rearmament to the A2 did not happen up until the early 90s. For example, one former member of our airsoft team served in the US Army in the late 80s, and they didn't even heard about the M16A2 yet. You could definitely spot units equipped with M16A2 during the Panama invasion in 1989, where most units were equipped with M16A2. But you need to understand that units heading into the combat are the best equipped and trained, and that doesn't tell about the average state of affairs. Based on the Vietnam experience, the 30-round magazines appeared. The first magazines for M16 rifles were 20-round ones. As for the Soviet Union, based on American experience, they changed their intermediate cartridge from 7.62 by 39 to 5.45 by 39 and began issuing AK-74 rifles with the folding stock like this, and the AK-74 rifles with the wood furniture, which later was substituted with the plumb plastic one. In my opinion, these rifles are pretty much equivalent. One is a little bit more reliable, another one is a little bit more accurate. AK-74 has slightly less recoil compared to M16, yes, try that yourself. If you are talking purely about the infantry weapon, they are more or less competitive. If you understand the requirement to the small arms, their purpose and their role in the mass armies, you won't even question that. If you're looking to details, PKM is slightly better machine gun than M60. Reliability-wise and the weight-wise, it is the best machine gun in the world. Back in the days, SVD was way better than M21 rifle. However, today it is worse compared to M110. You have to consider one nuance. It is like a video game, you cannot max out one stat without minimizing another. Each country tries to excel in what it considers promising at the time. If we compare these kits in general, we'll see that they are equivalent. If we go item by item, yes, we can find a clear leader in each category. But to get the right conclusion, we need to look at the bigger picture. I hope you like this video, subscribe to my channel, put like, comment, share this video with your friends. If you want to help the channel financially, links are in the description. Now we even have YouTube thank you feature available, so you know what to do. And I will see you next time. Bye.